and welcome to the Shoutout Podcast. I'm your host, Ross Baxter, and today is episode 25 of the series. In today's episode, it's going to be a wee bit different. Today, I'm going to be tackling a project of mine in terms of I'm covering my process for a train piece I created. It's called Parallel World, which was based off one of my favourite artists, who's a concept artist called Mark Lee, and I'll include Mark's ArtStation and links in the comments below for you to go check out his incredible work. So basically on this podcast I'm going to be talking about my full process from start to completion of how I created this train. So basically highlighting the do's and don'ts, and for example the things I could have improved on as an artist. And there's one main thing I also want to cover, which is the things that I wish I could have added, in the sense that I just wish my computer was maybe powerful enough to maybe cope with these things. However, I'll be able to go in depth with that with you guys, so that's not a problem at all. So I'm really looking forward to that. As always, if you're new to the Shoutout Podcast, we are live on 9 other platforms alongside YouTube. We are live on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, and finally Stitcher. And don't forget to subscribe, that'll be much appreciated. We've really began to kind of take off with this channel. I really thank everybody who's been tuning in. We're closing in on 1,500 subscribers, and we've literally gained almost 100 subscribers in 2 days, which has been awesome. So I really do appreciate everyone's been listening and taking part. But yeah, so make sure to subscribe. Please leave a like if you enjoyed today's podcast. It'll be much appreciated. And as always, the main thing about doing this podcast, it's about you, the artists, and everyone who's been listening. And basically, the thing that I do on this podcast is ask you to share your art links and put that in the comments section. And basically, the purpose behind that is to make sure that I could, it's basically just to help you guys a wee bit and try and get more exposure, because there's a lot of great artists out there, and a lot of people who don't get the attention I think they deserve. I think I worded that correctly. Yeah, I think I worded that right. So there's so many people I want to start obviously sharing. Like, if you're confident in your artwork, share it. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't matter what level you are as an artist, as long as you are okay to getting your work out there. That's fine. There's no problem with that. So, like I said, no matter what the level, just include it in the comment section, and I'll make sure to share your work everywhere. And if it's an ArtStation, whatever, or even if you're an animator, I'll include that as well. There's going to be a lot of animators, believe it or not, coming back on the podcast, and I'm really looking forward to that one as well. But yeah, so this week's shoutouts, we have two. We have two incredible artists. So the first one is Darian Harvey, who is an environment artist, whose work you'll see on screen in just a second, or right now, depending how I edit it. But thank you so much for sharing your work. It's really awesome to see what you've been working on. I really love the Substance Painter textures you've been doing. That's really awesome. I'm still myself trying to learn Substance Painter, so not Substance Painter, Substance Designer. Sorry, I got that wrong. Substance Designer. You've been working on it. It looks awesome. So make sure to go give him a follow and check out his work. The second shout out is Liam Meldrum, who's a graphic designer and YouTuber as well. Liam is awesome. He's an awesome artist, and he's created 5 awesome videos on his YouTube channel for a while now. So I highly recommend for you to go check him out. Also, when it comes to Liam as well, I'm very grateful for what he's done for me when it comes to my channel. So when it comes to the audio settings and stuff, so everything you guys have been listening to, Liam has helped me out in the past with the audio. And audio, when it comes to podcasts, it's the most important thing. So please go check him out and give him a follow. I'll include both these guys' links and social media, so forth, in the comments below. So make sure to go do that. But yeah, with that said, before we get into real depth about the podcast, just a quick summary. So once again, we're going to be talking about the train piece and talking about my process. But thanks, and let's get into it. So let's get on with this. This is going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to this episode. It's going to be really cool. So when it comes to, obviously, art in general, we as creatives, obviously, we have so many different inspirations. We're inspired by so many different types of art, so many different types of things, whether it's characters, environments, you name it, landscapes. There's so many awesome things to kind of get inspired by. And when it comes to art. So when it comes to just being able to create, the main thing for me personally is, when it just comes to portfolio just in general, is it's the obvious one. You have to have passion. You have to enjoy the thing that you're going to create. And like, for example, the main question when it comes to this train that everyone's been asking me has basically been like, how were you so patient to make something the size that it is? Because it is a large environment, personally, based off how long it took me to create, because it did take a long time. But when it comes to art pieces, you have to be able to identify kind of a lot of things about yourself. Not necessarily the art, but mainly about you. So when it comes to art, there's so many different things, so many different levels, so many different sizes of projects. So for example, if you're wanting to make a small asset project, then that's fine, then that's a small asset project. If you want to make a large environment, then that's a larger environment project. However, that comes down to you. So you making the decision of what kind of art piece you want to make. And the problem that a lot of artists have when it comes to just, I think it's every sort of creative thing, is sometimes they'll start a project, they'll work on it for a wee bit, and they'll stop, and then they'll start again, and they'll stop, and they'll keep going into this, they'll keep creating this bad habit, and naturally through time it'll just become very consistent, and it's not a good habit to have. Obviously, I guess the great habit, I think the one thing that this applies that could be a possible benefit in maybe some sort of essence is concept artists. So concept artists think so much in terms of, like, they have so much sort of ideas that they have to kind of generate very quickly, rapidly for production. So they naturally have well, personally, based on my own perspective, of all the concept artists I've worked with, talked to, they're just drawing crazy, and it's awesome. They're just doing what they want. They're like exploring shapes and trying out new things. But when it comes to, for example, this train project, the one thing that was made very clear by myself was that I knew I was going to have a blast making it and to have just having fun. And this is the main step that most people fall short on, because they choose a piece that they might be, I don't know, half-hearted on, or they're not quite sure if they can go the distance with it. And when it comes to art with me, I always start a project and I always finish it. I've never been one of those people that start a project and then kind of like change their mind. It's very, if I have done it in the past, it's incredibly rare. I don't recall the last time that's ever happened to me when it comes to just art pieces. I've always been very methodical with the decisions that I make, because it's, at the end of the day, it's very, as artists, you're on a time scale, and time is very crucial in the industry that we work in. Sometimes you only have a few days to create things. Sometimes you're more blessed than others. You might have a bigger role, whether or not you're creating a hero asset for a AAA game or a VFX studio, whatever it is. You might be allowed more time, but also remember, sometimes you don't have all the time in the world. And the reason why I'm bringing up all these aspects is the fact that choosing the right art piece is so crucial, because I worked on this project for about 6.5 months in terms of that's how much it covered. However, if I had to like nail it down, like really collapse it down, it probably took me about 4 months, 3.5 to 4 months to make, in terms of if I was just working non-stop on it. And I never really, as I was going along, like I wasn't ever really getting bored of it, because I knew I loved it. And I know sometimes it's hard for people to stay committed with something that they've been working on for so long, but once you completed a project of that timescale and it's taking you so much commitment, you then carry that work ethic and mentality onto your next project. Sometimes maybe you may not enjoy these long projects, like it might get boring, but that's why it's so important to choose something that you want to create. And I wanted to make a big kind of point about this, because when it comes to large projects, I highly recommend you just take the time to kind of identify the type of art that you want to make, and make sure that you're prioritizing it around fun. Like, what do you enjoy the most? It's so cliche, but so many people base it around getting their job or whatever. And I understand that you want to inspire, you want to create, you want to get into game, you want to get into film, whatever it is. Therefore, you're like maybe asking lots of questions such as, right, does this environment identify the requirements of baking, of all these different things to get me into a studio? That's great. However, if you're not enjoying it, then there's no point in you making it. That's my sort of mentality. But I also understand, though, when you get into the industry, one of the main things is being able to adapt to not creating things that you don't enjoy. However, when it comes to portfolio, personally, it should always be about pleasure. You should be having a blast every time you're making it. So, with that said, like I said, I'm going to be breaking down my process of how I created this train, the decisions that I made that I felt was good decisions, smart decisions, the decisions I felt were not good. For example, the things that I feel are not so good in the image, just the overall sort of journey, the process from start to finish, and talking about software, etc., how I create things. I'm not necessarily going to be showing anything in the sense that, like, I personally think when it comes to big pieces, most of it's down to patience. So when I created this piece, there's a lot of repetitive modeling, but I love doing that, so that's fine. So when it comes to you, identify what you're okay with and stuff, and what you get the most pleasure out of. So the next point that I want to bring up when it comes to just the art piece as a whole is identifying what you want to get out of it. So I just said there about, do you want to get into games, do you want to get into film? So when it came from me, I've always been about realism. I love detail. I love I could like talk about composition, talk about color theory, talk about selling story, and giving a proper narrative to a piece for ages. Like, I love it. But like, the main thing that gets me is trying to make something just as close to as believable as possible, or at least give it some sort of cinematic aesthetic. So that's the reason why I chose this piece. Like, this train piece, when I saw it, I was like, this is so awesome. Like, I love it. There's so much stuff going on. There's so much color, in the sense that, like, the red, it really pops out from the train. There's so much shapes. There's really awesome silhouette coming into play. Yes, there may be a ton of modeling to be required. However, when I start to break it down, it will all fall into place. And it's being able to acknowledge the things that you want out of the piece that really makes it easier. So I knew from the get-go that I was like, right, I'm aiming for a certain style. I'm aiming for a certain believability, like a certain overall aesthetic. And once I've got that down, then it's just down to me getting on with the work. So where does it all start? The most obvious thing, and the greatest thing I recommend for all you to do if you're an environment artist, is get your human figures to scale and bring them into an environment. So if you're making an environment, scale is one of the biggest things. Personally, it was the hardest part of this whole project based on the type of the concept art, because the concept art kind of had this sort of fishbowl lens effect that caused everything to have a slight sort of warp or bending effect to really sell the scale and composition of the image. So having that character or that figure as a base is so important. So I literally, when I started, or pretty much every project, I just throw about 20 characters all around the scene on a plane, and I base, well, when it comes to the scales or environments this big, I did the same thing when it came to the Martian project. So I created the Martian hab in 3D, which is highlighted on my ArtStation. If you want to go check it out, that'd be cool. But starting off with something that's very just obvious. So start off with that scale figure and take it from there. The next one, when you have a concept art and you're trying to capture something as close as possible, the major thing is reference when it comes to making it as accurate as you can. So gathering the right materials for mood boards, etc., and using that as a base to help you start blocking things out. So the more research you do before you start, the better you are to just making the overall pipeline, I think is the best word to go with, as smooth as possible. So if you do the research and take your time, naturally you'll be great. You'll do awesome. So just keep doing it. Kind of do it a very by the book sort of process when it comes to creating artwork. The great thing, I was fortunate about this piece, it came with blueprints in a way. So Mark Lee actually created a side view of the train itself, and the train is obviously the best part. That's the coolest part. That's the awesome part of this project. And by having a blueprint, it gave me a foundation to start modeling. So when it comes to modeling, the main thing is always about blocking. And the biggest mistake most people like to do as artists is that they like to go into detail first. However, they don't acknowledge the fact that detail is actually the blocking. So if you can block well, if you can get the shapes, the silhouette, that's you nailed detail in a way, in my perspective, because it's the thing that takes the most time. A lot of people, obviously, even myself, when it comes to sculpting, I love ornate sculpting. I could sculpt furniture, chairs, and that for days. I would love to do that. However, that can only kind of sell itself as an art piece if you nail down the foundation, which is the silhouette, the basic shapes, making sure the scale is correct. And like I said, when it came to this train piece, scale was the hardest thing. If you look in the image, you can tell the size of the figures that he's drawn in are not physically accurate when it comes to scale in terms of like the 3D world, but it still looks badass, so we just go with it because it looks awesome. And when it came to working on this piece, there was so many things I had to keep going back and forth and changing, because I at the time I didn't have the eye to know what was right and what was wrong. And this is when fundamentals come into play. So going back to the basics and understanding just like basic composition, basic rule of thirds, basic just basic theory, like even color theory. All this is very crucial. So when it came to modeling, I had the blueprints and I started blocking in shapes. And the main thing about this is having for example, I had the blueprint, so I import it into Maya. And when I have it in Maya, I then try and go as close as possible in X-ray mode. So and then moving vertices around. There's no sort of secret ingredient to the model. The main focus was focusing on the key shapes. So I focused on the train first and really made sure before I did any detail, I got all the shapes right. And the next major step for this project to make it right though, because of the lens effect that I have created and the artist created, that means the camera had to play a huge part. So instantly, before I went into any detail, I brought in the camera and I got the perspective or composition that I needed to get. And I played around with angles and focused on making sure that the effect was applied as close as possible. So I had that awesome little bend, sort of warp aesthetic that he's got. I'll be 100% honest, his is way more cooler than my final piece, in the sense that he was able to capture the sense of scale way better than what I was able to create. However, I still love the train that I made. I was really proud of what I've done, and you should be proud of what you make as well. But there were so many things that I knew I didn't understand or I didn't capture to the level that I wanted to. But that's a good sign. That knows that you're developing your eye, that you can understand what went wrong, what went right. For me, one of the main issues, believe it or not, was quite obvious, but it was not having the powerful enough computer to add all the things that I wanted to add. For example, characters, to add more depth and story. I was playing for a long time with smoke simulations and stuff to really try and add the mood, because atmosphere, like, that's the coolest thing. Oh, like when I talk to you about atmosphere later on, you're going to be loving it, because it's nothing really sells an art piece more than atmosphere. Obviously there's scale, there's story and stuff, but just by adding some fog, by gosh, does it really up your piece overall, especially when it comes to cinematic anyway. Like for example, particularly in films, you see them literally everywhere, just smoke machines going crazy. Like one of my coolest things ever was in Lord of the Rings, the first one, when they're going up the mountain, and Gandalf is pretty much like battling Saruman. All that scene in the snow is literally like, obviously, like, it's all smoke and stuff and that. However, it's actually all warm, so they're actually roasting. I'm not sure if any of you have seen the making of it, but it's so cool, but it added so much more depth to that scene by adding all these things flying in and so forth. And it was all physical. It wasn't VFX. It was all amazing touches that really sells an art piece. So get your blocking down and get your character in there. Simple as that. Once you've got that, you've got your base. If you find your reference, you're sorted. You've then got something to start your modeling with. And that also, like I said, helps with scale. So another thing, always remember when it comes to process, this is the main thing. Everybody has a different process. There's no secret ingredient to how necessarily to make the, I guess, most efficient way. Obviously, we have like it's all based on experience. There's a lot of artists that work way smarter than I do or way more efficient. However, that naturally comes in time, and through that time, you simply just get better. But when it comes to, for example, one of the main questions that a lot of people ask me is like, what software did you use? How did you render it and stuff? These are just tools at the end of the day. So this podcast, it applies to all of you. Like, you can all learn from it. It's not about, for example, what specific tool did I use in Maya to really help the modeling. There's no secret thing. It's just down to practice. So if you do have any questions regarding software, it's okay. Just fire away in the comments below. However, it's not the essential when it comes to, I guess, the pipeline and the workflow, and to most importantly, creating a beautiful piece. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want to do. You want to create something that's compelling, that you enjoy, and it's all about creating art. So once everything's blocked out and you've got everything kind of within proportion, and you think you've got a good sort of foundation to go with, that's when you then start going into more detail. So a lot of people have different workflows. Some people model everything and then they UV it and then they texture it, or it depends on your time scale and what you want out of it. For example, there's one piece of advice I was told, which was to every single piece you do one bit at a time and you do the full process, just so it naturally kind of feels like it speeds it up. But for me personally, I like to, I'm obsessed with the modeling aspect, so I literally just modeled the whole thing. So I modeled the whole thing for, how long did it take me? I think it took me, let's see, 2 months? 2 months to model the whole thing. I think roughly about 2 months. And that's the part that I enjoyed the most. So that's the thing I was going to take the most time in. Obviously, you have to master all the different areas, but do the thing that you enjoy the most. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to specialize more in modeling, then fire away. Go specialize in modeling. That's okay. Obviously, you need to be good at the other ones. Don't ever miss them out, because that's a bad move. But make sure to do the thing that you enjoy the most and highlight those things in your renders as well, when you're showing them on ArtStation or whatever it is. So, like I said, I got the proportions down. I started modeling more detail. The main thing when it comes to modeling, especially when you're going for detail, is bevel everything. Bevel like crazy, like you've never beveled before. It's all about beveling when it comes to modeling. It's about getting those edges looking crisp and clean, so the light catches it perfectly and it looks right, and it has that sort of soft edge, really smooth render. And when it comes to rendering, for example, I use V-Ray. I love V-Ray. So the guys at Chaos Group, if any of you are listening, thank you so much. V-Ray is the coolest thing I've used ever when it comes to rendering. I actually used to use Marmoset. I used to use Marmoset Toolbag. I think it was 2 and 3. So I used that for a long time. I loved that as well. However, I've always been about really upping the quality when it comes to realism, and V-Ray really allowed me to propel myself forward in terms of the standard that I was aiming to achieve. When it comes to rendering, obviously it's later down in the pipeline. I'll just give you a quick hint. So what I use is I use the Noma tutorials to really learn about rendering. So if it's something that you want to really improve on as an artist, go check out the Noma tutorials. So you've got your modeling done. You've got the main shapes blocked in. You've went into crazy detail with the models. So the main thing when it comes to modeling, so the crazy thing a lot of people have been saying to me when it comes to the train is that there's so many pieces. So it is true, there's so many parts on this train. I began to lose count. My mind was just getting fried at times. I was like, whoa, what's going on? However, like I said, similar to the blocking things, step at a time and take your time. It's all about enjoying it and not rushing it, because if you rush it, you begin to make mistakes, which then make the process even longer. And you want to be as efficient as you can and do it as accurate as you can. So when it came to the small things, I literally used the duplicate tool as much as I could in Maya, and trying to think how to work smarter. And if I did need to duplicate, then that's fine. We're going to make it easier, because at the end of the day, it's about making it a smooth transition. So I modeled the whole train before I even went into the train station. The train station to me wasn't the essential, because one of the main things a lot of people lose sight of is the fact that you need to have a focus point in your art piece. So my focus point was the train. So if I went to crazy detail in, there's so much stuff I could have added or wanted to add as well to the train station, because I think the train station is the part of the piece that has more of there's more, I guess, clear space. There's more breathing space for the eye, more resting, that's the better word, resting area. And that's what I wanted to kind of aim for, because I wanted the train to be the priority of this piece, and that is what inevitably drives composition. So that train was the composition. Having the direction that the train was facing was my composition, and having the camera looking up really helped sell the scale, and that came from Mark's piece. And the other thing that sold the scale was the smaller aspects of the models, the smaller areas of the models, such as the benches and having the character figure in there. And if you don't have these things, it takes away the power of the scale of the train. So it's making sure when you're working with scale is to really think about the small things, such as for example, I wanted to add all the characters in the scene, but my computer it simply couldn't cope with it. Like, I had so many characters in the scene. I made lots of characters for the scene. I made a lot, and it was highly millions polys going on it. The computer was it was fried. It was not wanting to cope any longer. But because I even thought about doing compositing on top of it, just to like paint them in and stuff. Like, I wouldn't mind doing that, but at the end of the day, I wanted to focus on making sure that I highlighted something as professional as I could, or as close to the standard that the industry would probably be looking for. And the reality of I'll give you a big reality check when it comes to just art in general. So when it comes to your portfolio and you're trying to get a job, sometimes it's just one art piece that it takes to get people to be like interested in your work. So a lot of studios who's reached out to me, it's because of the train piece, and because of my Harry Potter piece. So sometimes when you're working, a lot of people always think, oh, it has to be having so many art pieces. That's not the case. Sometimes you just have to show them in one piece that you can do it, and then you might have landed yourself a job because you spent the time. Like, that's why I spent the 6 months to really make this piece. So many people, my family and my friends, were asking me, are you done the train piece? You're taking so long. And I was like, I'm going to do it the right way. I need to do it the smart way. And I want to make sure that I have no regrets. And that's the way I've always lived life. I've always made sure to live my life with no regrets, and to have fun, and just make the most of it. As corny as some of these things may sound to you, it's the things that really make a difference. So take that, and hopefully it'll help you improve as an artist. Okay, now it is time to talk about the most fun thing in all of 3D. We know what it is, people. We're talking about UVs. Here we go. UVs in Maya. Woo! Right. So, obviously, we all love doing UVs. We always have a blast doing them. So, the best things I want you to take from this section of the podcast is quite a lot. Well, we'll just get into it. There's quite a lot of things I want to cover about UVs. Like, the obvious one is how to set them up as efficiently as possible. For example, when I was working on this project for the train, I was working within the like a variety of different things within Maya, such as using the hypershade and so forth, and working with the nodes. And the main thing for me when it comes to UVs is obviously working efficiently as possible and breaking things down. So when I mean breaking things down, when it comes to your assets, understanding how to keep things as clean and as simple as possible, and not having too many. Like the biggest culprit to most artists is that people tend to UV everything. Like there was a crazy habit that I used to have, and I saw a lot of people doing it as well, going through universities, that people would literally UV one object and call that one object. So like say there was just one pole, they would have one pole UV and then that would count as one mesh. Whereas you really want to condense things down. And for example, for the train, I condensed it down to I think two parts. So you got the front main part of the train. Oh no, it's 3 parts. So the front main part, and then you've got the engine, and then you've got the carriages, and all those objects within that area is then separated into. I always like to lay things out when it comes to UVs. So for example, if the metals are on the top left, or like a particular metal, group them up together, just so when it comes into Substance Painter, it's easier to select them, and it's kind of it's almost like ID maps, kind of like trying to make it as clear and concise as possible. So make sure things are overall just as efficient as you can. So when it comes to breaking things down, I always group things. So Control G in Maya, whatever it is in your other software, and instantly once I've done the grouping, I give everything a particular wireframe color. So for example, if I was doing the train and I wanted to just work purely on the train, just to make it visually as easy as possible for me, I would put say a purple wireframe, or something that's very vibrant, let's say like a very awesome epic green, and it's instantly popping. And then when it comes to me just working, things just click naturally when it comes to making it nice and organized. I just like it to be nice and smooth. So working with the groups like that, apply the wireframe. That's my method. You don't need to do it, but if it's something that you think might make it a wee bit more easier for you to understand, then fire away, do that. And then obviously once you've got all the UV sorted, it just makes things so much better, so much easier. Obviously when you're doing UVs, make sure to obviously there's a few points I'm about to make just now, but when you're doing UVs, make sure there's enough breathing space for bleeding, just in case. So when you're creating your assets, particular hero assets, so if it's the front of the train, make sure there's just enough space, and also for seams as well. Understand where to put them, because like obviously for this project, I was all about making the image as beautiful as possible. So I wasn't really going for like super clean. Like normally, if you're going for game, you want to be as best as you can. Obviously, sometimes you get away with certain lazy habits. Obviously, you don't want to generate those habits, but sometimes it's okay to be messy when it's not going to be seen. As long as it's not seen on camera, sometimes it's okay. Some people might debate that, but for this purpose, for this art piece, I was purely focusing on creating as beautiful image as I possibly could, and so the seams weren't as clean as they could have been. Obviously, the majority of the main ones were, so that was fine. And but yeah, keep things clean when it comes to UVs. Have the spaces as clear as possible, and you'll be sorted. Also, when it comes to UVs, the other main one is understanding when to duplicate your objects. So similar to what I said earlier, when it comes to modeling, know when to duplicate things, and this plays such a big part with UVs, because as we all know, it can sometimes be a very tedious process. Believe it or not, for me, actually UVs is quite therapeutic at times. Obviously, it can get really repetitive at times, but for me, it is actually quite relaxing. It's just a change of scenery, but it's sometimes nice to just do something different. But yeah, so duplicating your objects. For example, the main one for me, and it's the obvious one you'll notice, is the carriage. For example, for that piece, I duplicated that asset and I used the same UVs because I knew based on the camera shot and the angle that I was going for, people weren't going to recognize the repetitive patterns because of how much variation I put in the texturing. People weren't going to notice it, so that was fine. So actually, before we get into texturing, I want to talk about a really cool aspect when it comes to this journey and this train piece as a whole, and that was the camera. Like, camera was so awesome in this train. Like, I had a blast making this, working with the camera on this train piece, and it's very subtle. You begin to develop, like I said, the eye to, and understanding of how things work, and through me learning the focal length, the shutter angle, the depth field, the f-stop, all these different awesome tools to work within to really bring out the composition. Like, these were really powerful tools, and before I started this project, I was not aware of this, like how much of an impact it had. And through developing an appreciation for camera and what a camera does for your film, like for example, understanding the aspect ratio, because that obviously falls into play to the composition and overall creating like a cinematic image. Like, these things are great things to start exploring. So if you're an environment artist and you're trying to really sell the believability of the shot, adding the motion blur, adding the depth of field, all these things are so, like, all these things together, it just encompasses, how could I say it, composition, and it really brings out the story. So really start dwelling more into camera, really look into how the camera should be set up, how the shutter angle and all these things take a toll on the image, really trying to understand what the camera does. The biggest issue a lot of artists do is they're too afraid to explore new things, and you have to start getting out of your comfort zone. Start exploring these awesome things around you. Like, for example, I repeatedly say, go outside, try new things. The biggest flaw with so many people when it comes to creating images, for example, even myself, like, my lighting ability is still not at the level that I want to get. However, my lighting has improved drastically because of my observation through outside and trying to understand what it actually means. The biggest mistake, though, when it came to lighting for me, though, was simply sometimes I was playing a random game or a guessing game, and you don't want to be guessing. Like, I understood for this piece, I think I've said it before, I understood about 50% of the lighting of my scene, and some of you that might become as a shock. And the reason why I'm saying this is that, like, obviously you can create lights and you can create something beautiful, and you might maybe get a wee bit lucky somewhere, but if you don't understand the theory behind it, then it's not going to have any impact on the progression, on your progression as an artist. So, for example, my next piece, I can't wait to show you what I've been working on, folks. I'm so excited. I'm working on I've always realized that every time I choose a project, I always like double the size and double the complexity. So I'm making an art piece at the moment that kind of puts my train piece to shame, in the sense that my train piece is like tiny in terms of complexity and size in comparison to what this piece is going to be. Like, this piece is going to take me a long time to make. But yeah, sorry for blabbering on for a second, because I can't wait to show you. It's going to take a while until you get to see it, but I really hope you do enjoy it when it is released. But back to the train. Make sure to go explore these things. Try these things out. Have fun with it. Even if it's like, for example, lighting studies and you're going outside. Just if you're not a drawer, if you're not the best at sketching, all you need is words. Write down what you see. If there's a certain trend in the pattern. Everybody's probably best photographer, famous or favorite photographer, we all know who it is. It's Liam Wong. Check out his work. Understand what he's trying to deliver and sell, or say, should I say, in his artwork. There's so much color, so much exploration. It's the same with Ben Nicholas. We had Ben Nicholas on the podcast, and we were talking about how bold and how much fun you can see he's having with the colours that he's experimenting as a concept artist. And that's the thing about environment art. Obviously, I understand, as an environment artist, we are normally our main role is to recreate others' work and try to capture as much as possible what they've drawn on paper. However, it doesn't mean that we can't add our own flair to it. It doesn't mean that we can't start exploring these different things. So really start to appreciate you as a designer as well, and a concept artist. Like, you are a concept artist as well. I know that may sound a bit crazy because you're like, I'm an environment artist, but really try and start thinking about what's going on in the image. So if you learn these tips and you're wanting to get into film, these things will really help you sell the shop. So like I said, focal length, shutter angle, depth of field, and f-stop, so that's for the camera stuff. And to carry on the whole topic of lighting, before we get into texturing and stuff, the reason why I wanted to bring up lighting there was because it's always great to just have something to work with when you're working in an environment. So as you're going along, throw in a HDRI, throw in maybe a physical sun and sky into the scene, just to get the what's the wheels turning? What's the phrase? In the head, or whatever you want to call it. But it's like just to get some sort of visualization of how things possibly could look. Like I said, so I used V-Ray for this project, and the coolest tutorial ever. So I watched it's two people's tutorials. So I watched an incredible series by Devin Fay. It's about a sci-fi environment that he created, and I'm pretty sure he's designed it around VFX. So, but all the methods still apply in terms of the theory to games as well. Obviously, there might be slight adjustments, but I highly recommend. I think there's a trial for the Nomen tutorials, but I try out the one with Devin Fay. So I used that, and oh my gosh, it was so uplifting. It was amazing to see what he did with V-Ray, and it was so simple as well. He used, no joke, about 4 lights in his scene, and his scene looked so epic. It was so amazing seeing what he was doing with that. And to me, it was all about creating that, I don't know, it was that you can see the mood that he was showing in his artwork, and you can tell just like he was also understanding. Obviously, he understood what he was doing, and but he explained it so well. He provided that theory background. He gave you the knowledge that you needed to know, because the biggest mistake a lot of people who do tutorials or podcasts or whatever it is when it comes to teaching is that a lot of people tell you the technical thing, but they always forget the theory. And there's too much, I think, mistakes happening at the moment when it comes to teaching. I personally believe in the sense that a lot of people can maybe they're good at art, but they're not the greatest at explaining things. I'm not the best, however, I'm constantly trying to work on trying to help make my explanations a lot more clear and concise. But when it comes to the teaching aspect, Devin Fay was so, how could I describe it, so thorough. And so for instance, his scene, so I applied exactly what he did to my scene. So we start off with a HDRI. So if you don't know what HDRI is, it's pretty much like, it's, well, in terms of my the best way to visualize it, it's almost like a globe in your scene, and the image is literally wrapped around the globe, and it projects the light onto it. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. So there's a lot of different methods you can use for lighting. There's like different setups. So if you just want to go down the HDR route, that's okay. If you want to use your physical and sun and sky, and then apply your other lights as well, that's okay. Like your point light or whatever it is, your directional light, whatever it is. The only thing though, the one thing I will inform you about V-Ray is that V-Ray uses its own lights, so you do have to use the V-Ray lights in order for them to work within the engine, in order for it to be rendered. I think sometimes you can change the settings for the directional light. No, that's wrong actually. You have to use a plugin for the directional light for V-Ray. So make sure to check them out. And when it comes to learning about lights and learning about just theory in general, make sure to check out the Chaos Group website. The Chaos Group website has the best out of everybody, no joke, personally, I think, has the best breakdown of the theory of everyone in the industry so far, in terms of, I think they're the one, like, normally most people don't like seeing Word documents, however, the way they set it up is the most efficient that I've seen so far. And then the other great example is the tutorials from Nomen. So those are the two big heavy hitters, I personally believe, who have done it the best in terms of just being straight to the point with the artists. And that's what you want at the end of the day. You want the information straight to the point, and it's easy to understand. And that's crucial when it comes to getting where you want to go. So make sure to check those things out. But so when I was using V-Ray, there obviously it was a learning curve. So obviously at the start of the tutorials, I was like going just through the tutorial through what Devin did. So I added my HDRI, I added the other lights that I want to add to give a bit more mood to the scene. But the biggest mistake that I almost fell into, I kind of did. It was like a trap I kind of fell into. You begin to kind of get a habit of just trying to throw lights everywhere, and then you forget that actual simplicity is the best. So I learned obviously the hard way. So I was getting so frustrated creating the lighting for the train station that I lost sight of the obvious. Therefore, what I did was, I think a week. This is scary to think about, but I think it was like a week or two before I posted my train on ArtStation. What I did was I deleted every light in the scene except from the HDRI, and then my 3-point light setup, and that was it. So I used to have, this is crazy thinking, but I had like 60 lights. No, not maybe not that much. Probably about 40 lights in the scene, and I was like, why am I doing this? So what was my reasoning behind that? And then by deleting all of them, the image improved so much more. And it was through that kind of wake-up call that I began to start really thinking about what lighting really meant. And to me, lighting is the most, like, I'm one of those people who kind of likes everything, I like pretty much the whole process. But lighting to me is the most fulfilling aspect for me as an environment artist. Obviously, like, I love modeling. I could sculpt for days. Like, sculpting's my favorite thing. But if I could master the craftsmanship of lighting, then life is complete with me. Like, I'm so happy. Like, that it was so cool learning lighting. And but before I blabber on and geek out about lighting, we'll get into the next part. Okay, so the next section of this part of the podcast is actually texturing, which obviously doesn't come as a shock, but when it comes to texturing, there's a lot of different important areas to focus on, or I personally believe you need to actually understand. So the common mistake I see a lot of artists when it comes to texturing is similar to the modeling, in terms of they want to jump straight into the details, jump into learning the generators, or constantly layering things on top and stacking them and just trying to look for something cool. But the biggest problem about this is that there's no knowledge of understanding of how things actually work, such as the Fresnel effect. There's a lot of artists who, like, if you're listening to this, highly recommend to check it out. So it's the observation that the amount of reflection you see on a surface depends on the viewing angle. And this is very important. Some people, obviously, if you're wanting to be an environment artist, obviously it's not necessarily your role to do the texturing, but it's good to actually have a good understanding to how things works, particularly the shaders as well, in general, in regards to reflection, specularity, and the other attributes as well, which all vary according to the angle that's coming through it. But when it comes to texturing, there's so many different things that you can learn. Really, like, texturing brings your piece to life. It really brings it to the final stage. You're closing in on almost finishing. And when it comes to texturing, I highly recommend for you to actually understand the materials that you're working on. A lot of people just throw things on, and it never helps you in the long run. Like, truly try and understand why you're using this texture, why you've painted certain detail in a certain place, how is it meant to react. And obviously it's through observation you're going to understand this. So for example, me on the train, the main thing is, so a train is obviously going always across a track in one certain direction. It's not going back, it's always going forward. So the way in which the dirt hits through natural events and so forth, so as it's going forward, the wind's blowing it and it's going across the engine, so it's going parallel towards it. It's like, it's not going to be dripping down the way. Obviously, if it's stationary, there'll be the occasional wee bit of dirt, but it's going to be so subtle you probably won't notice it. And coming from the camera angle that I'm going to be viewing it at in terms of the composition, there's a certain amount of detail that you want to show, and there's certain detail that isn't required. It's not such a biggie when it comes to my piece, in the sense that the engine is not super close, but it is close enough that you can still see enough of the shapes and enough detail, etc. So really start thinking about why you're putting things where they are. One of the best examples one of my friends gave me was, because he truly understands his materials, and I've mentioned his name before. His name is Yannick Cowan. I highly recommend to check out his concept art. He's an incredible artist, so make sure to go check out his artwork on Google. Just type in Yannick Cowan, the best concept artist I know personally, and he really taught me the fundamentals of how materials should work. And for example, the thing that helped him with his foundation when he was learning first was painting models. So he's a great craftsman, that's the word, and he told me to start exploring painting like tanks, painting actual vehicles themselves, and trying to explore how it should actually work, and doing it by hand. Obviously, if you're not really into that, then that's fine, but there's great videos on YouTube of how people are painting their models, and professionals who are painting models, or like in not in 3D, but actual like traditional methods. And it's the traditional methods that a lot of artists have fallen so short of. And I understand as well, like a lot these days, you don't necessarily, or you don't really need to have any traditional skills at all in terms of trying to get a job or to guarantee a job. However, if you really want to get ahead, personally, I believe the step in the right direction is using those traditional techniques and really understanding like how colors work and all these different things that play such a huge part. And so many people are forgetting about this, and they lose sight of it. Like, it's the same thing when you're doing sketches to create a concept. If you're not a concept artist, it's okay, but as long as you sketch something to give you an idea, it's helping you with that vision. And that's why I said earlier, worst case scenario, just write words. But it always helps to have some sort of visual cue to work with. So really understand the materials, what you're doing with them, what direction are they coming in, where should, like, all the nooks and crannies, like, what are the main parts that are going to get the most dirt, where they're going to get most wear, what's going to be the most cleanest area. So for on the top of the engine, is that going to be the most cleanest part because it's not really coming from much dirt from down below? Is all the impact directing right at the front of the engine, at the side of the carriages? Also understanding about like the scale. If it was a lot smaller, it would be very dirty going across. But because how vast it is, when you're going at a certain speed, like, there's all these different questions you can start asking yourself to really go into depth. And when it comes to this sort of area of thinking, this is when I ignore the whole pipeline sort of aspect. This is where I ignore, is it for game or is it for film? Because if you think about it personally, about creating a beautiful piece and an accurate piece, then you'll learn, and then that will then transfer over to your pipeline speed on like a, I guess again, a hero asset or whatever. So really focus on the theory. That's why theory is so crucial, and so many people overlook it, and I don't know why. I understand a lot of people just want to have fun with the actual just painting or whatever, but to really get the best out of it, really try to understand what you're doing. So when it came to, for example, I was working in V-Ray, so I was working on the hypershade constantly, so I was always in the hypershade and working with all these different materials. And it was very important for the shaders that obviously they had to be V-Ray material. And V-Ray material, I then had to go into depth about how V-Ray material worked, what was its pipeline, how did it work with the lighting, because those really went hand in hand together, and there was a lot of different settings I had to explore. So, and because it was such a new thing to me, I knew I had to invest. So I started investing more money once again into the Norman tutorials, and this is when investing becomes very smart, and this is when you have to be methodical as well with your decision making. But I always knew that through asking questions and people who I asked what were the best tutorials for V-Ray, etc., I was always told to go to the Norman ones, and I invested £33 a month for 2 months, 3 months, and really learned the foundations and branched out further of V-Ray to really understand how the pipeline worked when it came to the texturing, etc., the lighting, just the overall rendering process. And that money was well put to use. And sometimes you need to invest. So understanding when to start investing in good tutorials. Really, if you want to take that leap as an artist, you have to progress, and because not everything is free, unfortunately. There's a lot of great tutorials online you can find, but sometimes it takes a long time to look for them. And if you're trying to get a piece maybe done quicker, then I highly recommend thinking about investing some money. But when it comes to the Hypershade, there was a lot of different, I guess, caveats that I came across early on without having those tutorials, such as I wasn't sure why the lighting wasn't working so well on the materials. Like the metals did not look like metal at the time, and it was because of understanding how the nodes worked properly that I was able to fix those problems. And then all of that problems kind of went away, and everything naturally just fell into place, and the lighting became just so much easier. And like I said, so when it comes to the lighting of this piece, there were so many different challenges that I faced, because lighting at the time was the hardest part, and I love lighting. Lighting's so cool. There's so much exploration to be explored, and there's so much fun you can have with it. So I was always aiming for as realistic as I could, but I didn't understand at the time what realism actually meant or what it looked like. Like, I had an idea, I had an incline of the art pieces that I really was really passionate about. I mentioned earlier Devin Fay. He made this incredible art piece. It was like a robotic sort of Blade Runner-esque sort of sci-fi corridor, and it felt realistic. However, it also had this sort of cinematic render, like composition and everything, and it was great. So I was trying to aim for something like that, and really trying to bring my own taste into Mark Lee's concept. But when it came to lighting, when I was starting off, it's the same thing when it came to tutorials. I needed to start branching out more and started investing once again. And there was a bunch of great tutorials that I learnt from. So, I just remembered. Yeah, so the person who I learnt from for the lighting was obviously Devin Fay, but a great example when it came to the foundation of lighting, like truly understanding how colours work, was Jeremy Vickery. I'm pretty sure it's Jeremy Vickery. I'll just double check just to make sure. Yeah, so it was Jeremy Vickery. Absolutely incredible lighting artist and just artist in general. And basically I watched his color theory video on Nomen, and then his lighting video process on Nomen. So basically what he did was he collaborated with an animator who was creating this really beautiful ghost animation in a corridor, and he was talking about how he lit everything, and he used V-Ray as well. The main thing though, I'm not just saying use V-Ray. That I'm talking about, like, all these lighting things I'm talking about applies to everything. That's why I'm not going into detail about each certain aspect, in terms of I'm not going really into depth about V-Ray, because all these different things I'm mentioning applies to everything, and that's why I want it to obviously help everybody. So Jeremy was talking about all these awesome tips and advice of how to really sell your artwork and when to use certain things. And he also talked about atmosphere. Like, it was through his video that I learned how to use atmosphere and create fog. And fog was such a huge part in adding the scale to my train. It's very subtle, but it goes a long way. It's those subtle adjustments or subtle additions that you add to an environment piece that can really propel it forward. So I was learning about like, for example, with area lights, where to put them. So the main thing I realized about area lights is it helped with the bounce lighting. And bounce lighting, when it comes to environments as big as mine, it was crucial. Obviously, it's crucial all around, but for this piece, it was incredibly important. And trying to understand why he was doing what he was doing. His approach when it came to lighting was actually quite, when you think about it, it's quite obvious, but you wouldn't notice unless you heard him say it. So every time he's creating a shot, so he was approaching it from obviously a short film, so shot by shot approach. So every shot had a different lighting, which made sense. But when you saw his corridor view, you wouldn't tell, because obviously he put the best lighting for that one camera. But he was always saying to pretty much approach everything as, I guess, story driven as possible. And the hard thing about the lighting, though, for my piece, and to apply what he said there about how to make it as story driven as possible, was the fact that because my scene was so big, I knew that in order for me to create the immersion and the feeling of the piece, I really needed to add the characters. And that was a big problem for me personally, because he had the ghost and he had the lady in that lighting scene to work with, and it really added the vibe. And in my scene, because I missed out of having all those, there must have been at least 500 characters. It really made it more difficult to make it not seem empty. And having empty areas can sometimes make or break a shot. And because I was going for a cinematic look, it was really difficult to try and overuse the fog. So So at one point I had fog everywhere, and then I had the lighting quite dark in the back here, so it would bring out the contrast at the front. So it would literally make the train a focal point at the front, so the main engine area, etc. But the problem I had with that personally was that I wanted to highlight the detail I made on the carriages. And believe it or not, there's actually a lot more modelling that you guys can't see that I've created, because I've blocked out the interiors, etc. And I always wanted to have, because I wanted to go full out, and I wanted to give everything to this piece. But you have to know when to stop or when to prioritize other things. And because of the characters not being in the scene, I had to really use the lighting and atmosphere to try and, I guess, hide the way that there was a lot of empty areas. Like, empty areas is good, like in the sense that, so for example, I mentioned earlier having the small aspects, such as the human scaled aspects, such as the benches, having maybe like plant pots, having just a character itself, having them really helps, at least help relax the eye and give it direction. But I could talk for ages. I don't want to get a bit too off course, but yeah, just be careful when it comes to, like, to always make sure you finish the piece. And if you're struggling with certain aspects, try and figure out obviously try to hide it. Like, sometimes you can hide things obviously in compositing. So if you do want to go into a compositing software and, for example, put the characters in just to give it more depth, then try and do that. But I would only do it if you truly know how to do it, or maybe get somebody to help you do it, or get them to do it, and then obviously mention their name, etc., that they did it, if it helps make the piece better. Like, I could have done that was an option for me, but I've always been very, like, I wanted to use this piece as such a learning curve that it helped me get where I wanted to go. But lighting was incredible, and through Jeremy Vickery's video, I learned so much. What I'll do is I'll highlight all the links in the section below, so you can watch the trailers of each piece, because you obviously have to invest into these tutorials. And so Jeremy Vickery, Devin Fay, incredible artists. Highly recommend checking these guys out, and it's very important. So the last bit I kind of want to talk about. So I've talked about, well, I guess there's two areas. So I want to talk about obviously taking things into the rendering stage, so such as Photoshop, but I also want to talk about good decisions and smart decisions. So there's a lot of artists, so all of us actually, so we all go through our journey of what could I have done better, and what did I do well. I really hope you acknowledge the things that you did well, because that's important. It's a crucial part. But yeah, so for the post production of this piece, I always keep things very subtle, because I'm not an expert when it comes to the post-production, but I do understand, based off what my friend who's a concept artist has told me about, how to make the color better, etc. So when it comes to Photoshop, I always take the image into Photoshop, and I instantly work with layers. The other great thing to do is to, when you're working with V-Ray, is to render out all the different channels, such as the occlusion map, etc. And if you understand that, that's the best pipeline for VFX. So if you do want to go into VFX, start understanding rendering out layers and using the render layers in V-Ray. I at the time didn't have the time to really go into depth about that, unfortunately, because I just was running out of time in order to get my piece done, because there's a lot of goals and other things that I've been trying to achieve. But that's one really crucial aspect when it comes to the VFX industry, is understanding render layers and how they work. So when I did my render in V-Ray, got my render out, and took it into Photoshop, and I started duplicating the layers. And the main things I worked with was obviously contrast, and another main thing that I always like to do is when I go into Photoshop, I instantly turn it into a black and white image. And the reason I do that is to understand if my lighting was actually close to being accurate. And for me personally, I realized there was a lot of mistakes that I did, and that was okay. But there was also a lot of nice areas that I was able to capture through that black and white render that I noticed was actually pretty good. It was actually pretty decent, and I was happy with that. That was really good. But it's these small things that can, like, if you're going back and forth, like, so you're doing lighting and then you do black and white, and then you start breaking down the image, like what's correct, what's wrong. You start learning about how lighting should actually work, and then you can start varying back and forth in the actual render itself, and that gives you time. Like, obviously, when it comes to rendering, there's so many different things. Like, I use V-Ray because it's purely, it's so fast, it's powerful, and it instantly creates a beautiful image, and it only relies on a few lights. So I only used a HDRI. I explored a 3-point light setup, and then I used point lights and area lights. So I obviously used the point lights for all the lights on the carriages, and I was very subtle with the colouring with that, and the intensity, just to make sure it didn't overlook the front. And then when it came to make sure I had some bounce lights, what I did is, just to be a bit careful with how, just make sure things weren't going too crazy, I put area lights the same scale as the train, facing upwards underneath the train, all the way down towards the carriages, slowly getting darker and darker so it would fade out. And but there's maybe a few other smarter ways to do that, and that's where getting the right tutorials really helps. So I was in Photoshop and I was working with the layers and stuff. Like I said, I don't like to go too crazy. Like, a lot of people try and really go like super like insane with the colors and stuff, but for me personally, I go very subtle. So the great thing about metal is, the concept that I was working on, is that there's a lot of little tinges of blue. So blue is great when it comes to metal, and when I was working through, I can't remember what it's called, but it's the color bar, and so I would slightly aim it to the blues, and then a wee bit more to the yellows, to give it more of a bit of a warmth render look, because I was kind of going for a very, obviously, like, I wanted to add a bit of my own touch to it while still kind of staying true to the concept. So this is where color theory is important, understanding where what colors work right, and also in the scenario that you're rendering. Is it daylight? Is it nighttime? What scenario are you trying to create your shot for? So when it came to the post production, it was very simple. I wasn't trying to go like overdo anything. I did have a try of adding certain smoke effects and layers in Photoshop itself. However, for the composite, I just wasn't skilled enough at the time to create it. But that's really my process, and that's really what I did. Obviously, there's a lot of things that I was happy with, like, for example, the good decisions, the smart decisions, or like and the bad decisions as well. If I had to redo this piece what I would do is, or the things I would add as well. Like I would love to add more modeling to it. To me personally, I wanted to go way more crazy in depth with the detail of the modeling. I wanted to add everything when it came to the train station, but my computer, my computer was dying. Unfortunately, it couldn't survive it, and but that's also when it comes to efficient modeling as well. But I think my modeling is pretty efficient, so I've learned a lot over the last few years because I've been obsessed about modeling. So I would add more model detail. I would try and understand the V-Ray render layers more, so I could take it into Photoshop and truly understand how that works. The best video for that, if you're wanting to go and explore what I'm talking about for VFX, type in Vitali. What's his name? God, he's like the best hard surface artist in the world. What's his name? Like this time to use a good Google search. Hard surface artist, and he was on Art Cafe. He was on the coolest video on Art Cafe I've ever seen. Video, I'm sure it's Vitali. Is it Vitali? But anyway, I'll find the name and I'll put it in the link below. So, the guy was just a master at his craft, and he has a great video of how he breaks down the render layers for that. So make sure to check that out. The other main thing that I wanted to get better at is the lighting and truly understand what was going on, how to make it more appealing, how to make it more physically accurate, but also staying true to not. Like, it doesn't always have to be physically accurate. Like, that's not a must. It's just that, like, because obviously every shot that you get in VFX, it's not necessarily, like, none of it's really real, or like, because they're really going for the story. Like, obviously there's a lot of things that are real, but most of it is highly driven through just creating it as cinematic as much as they could, or as much as they can. I would say the things that I could have done better at, I would say, personally, well, the things I say I did good at. So it was the model. I enjoyed the model. I think the model was strong. It was the strongest aspect of this piece. I really improved on my lighting overall. The texturing, personally, I think there's a lot of improvement there to be made, but it is getting there. And and as long as you can see what you need to improve on, that's the main thing. Of like other things I wish I could have added, or like I said, was the characters. Adding the characters would have been great. Would have been really awesome to do. Adding more, like, for example, one of the things I was learning was a software called Phoenix, which is a plugin for Maya, and it adds atmosphere. So I was working with that to add clouds of smoke, which you see in the concept coming from the ground, which comes, I believe, beside the tracks. So I was learning Phoenix at the time to create that. However, I wasn't able to get the render working for that, unfortunately. So I am learning how to do that would be a bit better. So adding learning more about atmosphere, that'd be great. It's always, you can never add too much atmosphere. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. There's so much things you can go crazy about, but that's the fun part. But yeah, I would say that's the best breakdown I could give you guys of all the ups and downs, the way I work, the mistakes I made, the journey overall. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. There's a lot of podcasts coming out in today, so stay tuned for that. Please leave a like if you liked today's video. That'd be much appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe. That'd be much appreciated, as always. And if you want to keep up to date of the next podcast, follow me on Twitter at @RossBaxterArt. And if you want to see my train process, my train breakdown as well, and my train just final renders, etc., check out my ArtStation. It'll be highlighted in the link below. And as usual, folks, have a good day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye for now. Catch you later.